Hello and welcome to the channel. Today, under the topic of breathing system or the respiratory system, we are going to talk about the topic of exchange of gases. That is how the different gases in our body, that is the oxygen and carbon dioxide, are transported through our blood into the different tissue system, all the cells of the body, and how are they exchanged at the different levels, that is the pulmonary or the alveolar level, at the lungs, and at the tissue level or the cellular levels. So let us start by discussing about the different circulation or two different circulation of our body. That is the pulmonary circulation, and one of them is the systemic circulation. So the pulmonary circulation, or I should talk about the systemic circulation first. So the systemic circulation starts from the left heart. When the left heart contracts, the blood comes from the aorta through major arteries, and then eventually it comes to the tissues where the oxygen and nutrients are delivered to the tissues or the cells, and the carbon dioxide is collected. The different waste materials are collected from there, and the veins drain the deoxygenated blood. Then it passes through the hepatic portal system and different veins, then drain the blood into the right heart where the systemic circulation ends. Then the pulmonary circulation starts, and through the pulmonary artery it goes to the lungs and at the alveoli where the main gaseous exchange of our body happens. Then through the capillaries the oxygen is transported into the deoxygenated blood, and the carbon dioxide from the deoxygenated blood is carried into the alveoli and through that ultimately to the environment. So alveoli is the point where the deoxygenated blood of our body is converted into oxygenated blood. So that is about the circulation. Now we are going to talk about the exchange of gases. To learn or to really understand the exchange of gases, we need to learn or need to know the partial pressures of the different gases, that is the oxygen and carbon dioxide, the partial pressures for both of them at different sites of our body. So if we start at the lungs where the main gases exchange is happening, so at the lungs the partial pressure for oxygen, as we can notice here, is 104 millimeter of mercury, and the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is 40 millimeter of mercury. Obviously the partial pressure of oxygen is way higher here because from it is the place from where the oxygen has to get transported into the blood. Then if we see in the arterial blood, the partial pressure of oxygen is only 90, is slightly reduced but not much, that is 95 millimeter of mercury, and the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is 40 millimeter of mercury still. Then if we progress through the system circulation and we eventually come to this tissue level, then we can see that the partial pressure of oxygen at the tissue level is 40 millimeter of Hg. It is way reduced and it is way less than the arterial blood, and the partial pressure of carbon dioxide here is the highest in the body, that is 45 millimeter Hg. And eventually in the venous blood the partial pressure of oxygen is lowest, that is 40 millimeter of Hg, just like the tissue, and partial pressure of carbon dioxide is 45 millimeter of Hg. So after learning all the partial pressures in different sites of our body, now we can understand truly the exchange of gas or the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide at these two sites, that is at the lungs and at the tissue level. So if you start by lungs, then when the deoxygenated blood from the right heart reaches through the pulmonary artery to the lung alveolus or alveoli, then what happens? As we know that the partial pressure of oxygen is, or I should say first about the partial pressure of carbon dioxide. So partial pressure of carbon dioxide is the highest in the venous blood, that is 45 millimeter of Hg. But if we see in the alveoli, at the lungs or at alveoli, the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is less, that is 40 millimeter of Hg. So there is a partial pressure gradient, and we must remember that all the gaseous exchange in our body happens by only simple diffusion to the endothelial membrane, that is here through the endothelial membrane of the blood vessels or the capillaries, which are very fine or thin, and also the alveolar membrane. So by diffusion, as there is a gradient of partial pressure of carbon dioxide from the venous blood, that is which is 45 millimeter of Hg, and in the alveoli, that is 40 millimeter of Hg. So there will be a net diffusion of carbon dioxide from the venous blood to the alveoli. So the carbon dioxide will diffuse out, but we see that partial pressure of oxygen is here the highest, that is 104 millimeter of Hg, but in the venous blood it is way less, that is 40 millimeter of Hg. So in the pulmonary level or the alveolar level, the oxygen will exchange, or it will enter through diffusion into the capillaries due to the change in the, or due to the pressure gradient, that is 104 millimeter of Hg in the alveoli, and in the venous blood that is 40 millimeter of Hg. So the carbon dioxide leaves and the oxygen enters here. So the deoxygenated blood coming from here is transformed into the oxygenated blood due to this partial pressure difference. Then the oxygenated blood goes into the systemic circulation. And now let's come to the tissue level. At the tissue level, we see that the partial pressure of oxygen was in the arterial blood 95 millimeter of Hg. After this oxygenation, 95 millimeter of Hg, and the partial pressure of carbon dioxide is reduced because the carbon dioxide has been diffused out. So the partial pressure of carbon dioxide this time is less in the arterial blood, and from the partial pressure of oxygen is high in the arterial blood. So in the tissue, we can see the partial pressure of oxygen is very low. Why? The reason behind that is that the tissue or the cells, by its various metabolic pathways, produces carbon dioxide. The carbon dioxide concentration inside the cell is pretty high. So what will happen? The partial pressure of the carbon dioxide in the arterial blood is less, 40, but in the tissue it is very high, that is 45 millimeter Hg. So the carbon dioxide is diffused into the capillaries and make the oxygenated blood deoxygenated. But whereas the partial pressure of oxygen in the arterial blood is 95 millimeter Hg, whereas in the tissue it is very less, that is 40. So the oxygen which was delivered into the arteries or into the circulation in the alveoli, that oxygen will travel through the system circulation and will be delivered, or it will diffuse out into the tissues due to this partial pressure difference. 95 millimeter of Hg in the arterial blood and 40 millimeter of Hg in the tissue. And carbon dioxide, due to the same partial pressure gradient, that is 45 millimeter of Hg in the tissue, as I said, due to the various metabolic pathways, it is concentrated inside the cell, and 40 millimeter of Hg in the arterial blood, it will diffuse out and make the oxygenated blood deoxygenated this time, and the venous blood will be rich in carbon dioxide, that is will be very much acidic. Then it will go, and then it will drain into the right heart and then continue as the, then it will again enter the pulmonary circulation and it will again exchange, the gases will be exchanged here at the lungs, and the cycle will continue. So this is how the main gases of our circulation, which are very essential for our at the cellular level working, that is the oxygen and carbon dioxide, are exchanged, and due to the partial pressure gradients, they are maintained in the blood and they are exchanged in the lungs and the tissue level. So hope you all have understood it very well. See you in the next video. Till then, bye.